I like pictures. This is an interesting one. This is actually a picture of Shenzhen from Hong Kong. And those things that look like rice paddies are not rice paddies, they're fish farms. But Shenzhen is a town that had 30,000 people 30 years ago. It now has 20 million people. And it's the Silicon Valley of China. So it's also, everybody speaks Mandarin except the people in Hong Kong who speak Cantonese. You have an interesting dichotomy there. I just got back from over there. I was basically presenting some awards for clean energy projects that were sponsored by the Shenzhen Energy Company, which is the big utility in Shenzhen and Guangdong. So Louisiana and China have a fair amount of trade relationships. One of the things that people always tend to forget is energy is not the biggest one. If you look at the port here in New Orleans, the biggest agricultural exports are soybeans to China. So we not only produce 1 million acres worth, but we also ship most of the soybeans that are grown in the middle of the country that come down the Mississippi River. Oil and gas, another 1 billion. Chemicals, almost as much. And then everything else together is about half the size of the chemicals. So China is very important to Louisiana specifically, but also to the Gulf Coast energy states in general. In terms of what we get from China, we get some finished chemicals, metal products, we've all heard about that, apparel manufacturing, and a number of other things. But if you're just talking about Louisiana, we run a big trade surplus with China, not a trade deficit. There's been a lot of talk about steel and aluminum. These are sort of stalwart industries in any country, but in the United States, they represent about 139,000 jobs just in the primary production. There's another 600,000 or 700,000 jobs in converting that ingot into something that you can actually use, like a pipe or a steel girder or whatever. Put it in context, there are about 6 million jobs in the chemical industry, chemical and oil and gas. So putting, as you may have guessed, I'm not a big fan of tariffs in general, but I'm especially not a big fan of tariffs on something that has 139,000 jobs and putting 6 million jobs at risk. That seems like a really bad idea to me. Here are the states that are affected, and you can read this at your leisure. I've gone through some of the numbers, but the top 10 states in terms of influence from the steel and aluminum imports would be, as you might guess, a lot of them right along the Mississippi River. New Orleans, in general, is somewhat wary of the economic damage that could come from steel tariffs and the resultant countervailing duties that the Chinese have said they would put on other products, most of which fall into that petroleum and petrochemical market that we talked about. So we're not a big fan. EIA has just provided some numbers here in terms of crude oil supplies and the destinations of our materials. And you can see for LNG here, we have another big ramp up. This is the result of 2016 is when the Cheniere, currently the biggest LNG export facility in the U.S., came online. Since then, we've done another brownfield conversion, which is up near Washington, D.C., outside of Baltimore. And the next one to come on stream is over in Texas. So we're chugging right along. China, for its part, is interested in importing LNG. They need the LNG. We'd like to sell the LNG. But if we're going to have a tariff war, the Chinese are putting duties on the import of LNG. And that has had a couple of side effects. One, it's made it more difficult to finance LNG facilities, export facilities. The other effect is we've actually had some plants say they're going to delay starting up, which is just going to exacerbate things and make the shortages worse than they would have been otherwise. This is data for 16 and 17, and you can see the trade in goods, about a $375 billion deficit. The press makes a big deal out of that. But they forget we have a services surplus of about $40 billion. And then we argue about new fixed direct investment. Our friend this morning talking about Exxon, one of the bigger potential sources for that. Even with all the debates, we are still a major investor in China. And you see facilities like Air Products building hydrogen plants in Chinese refineries, owned 100% by the American parent company, but operating on long-term contracts just the way they would do if they were here in the United States. We do have some intellectual property issues, but a lot of those seem to be focused on software, not on petrochemical plants or refineries. So what's involved in these negotiations? This is just, my opinion, but there's a couple of components. The first is sort of the classic debate about why doesn't China buy more stuff from the Americans? And I think that's a solvable problem because I've just listed some of the things here that China is a net importer of that the U.S. is a low-cost supplier of. LNG, ethane, ethylene, natural gas liquids, methanol. China is a big proponent of producing olefins, these plastics building blocks, using methanol as a raw material. There are a couple of plants, one Taiwanese, one Chinese, here in Louisiana that do nothing but produce methanol from natural gas, load it on ships, send it to China.